Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Nishant, and welcome to another episode of the Nishant Garg Show. The mission of the show is to spread awareness on mindfulness practices, psychology, mental health, and spirituality. My job on the show is to invite world class performers to share the practices to live a fulfilled life. This episode guest is Colleen. Colleen is a mindful clinical social worker, retired Broadway actor, former teacher, and artist who trained in MSBR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction at UMass Medical Center for Mindfulness. Colleen is passionate about mindfulness and its transformative effects. She leads groups and trainings and is a life coach and psychotherapist. She is an avid yoga and meditation practitioner, and as a speaker, she has presented on mindfulness, social emotional learning, stress reduction, and mindful leadership team development. In this episode, she discusses how mindfulness can be a foreign language to somebody, how to be with the monkey mind, how to use mindfulness in trauma, and to know more, keep listening. And here is Colleen. Colleen, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you, and I'm really looking forward to have an amazing, fun, mindful conversation with you.
Okay. So how shall we begin?
So how does your family describe what you do for a living?
Well, I have three grown children, 2 sons and a daughter, and they're very involved in their own lives. And, I'm not central in their lives, but I think if you were to ask them, each of them would say something different. But for example, my daughter might say that I am a teacher and a student and an artist. One of my sons might also say that I'm a teacher. I don't think any of them would actually know that I'm a mindfulness teacher, a meditation teacher. I think they're in their own space, it's not in their purview.
Why is it that they don't know about it? Didn't you ever tell them?
I do. I talk about it, but it's not in their language. They are in a different world.
Really?
Yeah, they are.
I didn't know that mindfulness can be a foreign language to somebody. Is that true?
I think it is. Well, they're in their 20s, young 20s. And, I think at various points in their lives, one of them is still in school, another one is working. The third one is sort of trying to create her own life. She's a musician and a composer and an actor. And I think that their world is very much on the screen, I don't think it's really having much to do with nature or learning to be still or learning to appreciate. I think it's a very different pace, their lives. Yeah.
If we talk about people, and then how would you describe mindfulness to somebody who are not aware of mindfulness language?
Well, that's a good question, because I teach mindfulness to many different populations, and one of the populations is children. I'm certified through an organization called Mindful Schools, and I did a year-long training plus some. And when I go into the schools and work with children, I would define mindfulness as paying attention to what you're doing right now, which could be anything from playing to playing basketball, to sitting and writing, to eating. It's really just being fully present in what you're doing at the moment. But for an adult, I would really frame it a little bit differently. I like Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness, and his is mindfulness is paying attention in the present moment in a particular way on purpose without judgment. And there's a couple of things. In a particular way, for sure, we can get back to that. But the non-judgmental quality is really, I think, really highlighted and really important for mindfulness. I think the particular way of mindfulness I mean, I was listening to Joseph Goldstein the other day, and he was talking about how his black Labrador, dog is mindful. He is very present. Actually, he didn't say he was mindful. He said he was very much in the present moment. And, he's running, he's sniffing, he's licking, he's cleaning himself, he's very much present, as an animal. But the black Labrador is not mindful as we think of it, as we're discussing it here. And I think I like what he said, which was that there's a little distinction in that mindfulness, in particular meditation, has an element of intentionality to it. So we bring this on purpose element to mindfulness and mindfulness meditation.
Why we purposefully bring mindfulness in our day-to-day life?
Why would we bring it to our everyday life? Well, I like to often, when I am in front of an audience or in a room, creating a group environment, which is a safe space and a trusting environment where we can go through the group process of exploring mindfulness together. I like to tell my own story a little bit. So I'll tell you a little bit about
Please.
how I came to mindfulness. Yes?
Please.
Yeah. So I was an actor in my time before my children, and then I became a mom and a teacher. I had a lot of life stressors, like many of us, and in particular now, I think a lot of people can relate going through the stressors of being quarantined, of losing friends and loved ones, of coming from a perspective of lack or not enough, or just a kind of mean-spiritedness that one might feel in the systems of government or systems that are social systems here. But, these stressors, I think I'm a really different person than I was 10 years ago, perhaps, definitely 10 years ago. At that time, I was your typical A personality, very driven, very goal-oriented, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I think it serves me well still to have that drive and to have that determination and grit, resiliency. But I've learned that, there's a skillful way, a skillful means that I have adopted or continue to try to adopt, actually. So at that time, about 10 years ago, everything was falling apart. My finances, my relationships, my health, my children were, going into high school and going into middle school, and my very long marriage was ending. I was moving out of a house, and I really was just completely unaware of how I held stress in my body. I was probably in a constant stress response, fight or flight mode, and didn't even know it. And at that time, like many of us who are searchers, which I know you're a searcher too, someone mentioned to me, I had so many books, reading so many books, right? And someone mentioned to me this book by Jon Kabat-Zinn, which was called Full Catastrophe Living. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna have to buy that. I order it on Amazon, get it, because, my life is a catastrophe. And it's an absolute catastrophe. And this book is gonna, self-help me out of my catastrophe. So
And what did you learn from that book?
What I learned was the book suggested, of all things, that I sit still and breathe, which at the time, I thought, you've got to be kidding me. How can I sit still? I want to run down the street and set my hair on fire. I want to peel my skin off. How can I sit still? I'm so uncomfortable. I'm so, certainly stressed, right? And so little by slowly, I committed. And the funny little key that opened the door for me was, I said to myself, well, you've sat through all those soccer games with your kids. I don't like soccer. I'm sure that many people do, but I'm not a soccer mom. And yet I would go to these games, park my chair, and sit through these games with my kids. And so I said to myself, well, if you can show up and sit in a chair for an hour or two at a soccer game for your kids, maybe you could do that for yourself. Maybe you could show up and sit down each morning for yourself. And so my process in the beginning was really like baby steps. I sat literally for 5 minutes and watched the clock. I couldn't even sit still. It was so uncomfortable. So
did you open your eyes, or were your eyes closed when you were watching?
They were closed, but I would sort of, be worried about how long it had been. My sense of time was not, everything was tumbling, thoughts moving very quickly, one on top of the other, the body's restlessness. As I say, the body's stress response it's a neurological response, a neurophysical response. So that was the beginning. And then somewhere along the line, I guess I decided, as many people do, they have their threshold, their saturation point where, that's it. You cannot take any more. And my cannot take any more was I want to just live fully, alive, awake. I want to be awake. I don't want to keep rushing through my life and moving from one task to the next and, or planning for the future, plotting the future. And so I think that was when I settled down and don't get me wrong, it took years. It took me about 3 years to really establish a consistent practice. And so part of it is the teaching, I'm very curious, like I think you are, right? And the curiosity led me to, let me just segue. I'm somebody who, in order to learn something, I like to teach it. There's that inside out perspective when you really jump into something and know it so that you can disseminate it, so that you can then communicate it to others. That's my learning style.
At what point did you realize that now you are in a position to teach mindfulness and meditation to others?
Well, it's been a process. Like I say, I've been a teacher of art and children for quite some time. And about maybe 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I went back to school. And I felt like I had a third profession in me. And I'm just finishing up now. I went back for a master's in social work. And so I am a clinician and a therapist. I suppose you could call me a psychotherapist. But the mindfulness training was something that I committed to a teacher training pathway at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, medical school. It's now changed and it's at Brown University, but then it was in Massachusetts and they had a teacher pathway. So even before I committed to the master's program, I committed to this, what they call MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And the teacher pathway really took me about, 4 years, I guess. It was very rigorous. The training was very in-depth and not inexpensive, not also, it took a lot of time commitment. So I did that teacher training at the same time that I did the mindful schools training. And it was just something I really didn't think I was going to need or want to be a clinician on top of the mindfulness, but I don't know. It just sort of happened. It just sort of fell into my path, and it seemed like it all fit under the umbrella of social work, working with people, which is something I'm very interested in.
There are a couple of points here, and I would love to talk about that.
Sure.
You are a clinical trauma professional. How mindfulness and clinical trauma professional go hand in hand? What is the correlation?
Well, trauma-informed mindfulness has only really become evident that we teachers of mindfulness need to have training and become aware of, because I would say that there is an epidemic of trauma in the country. There's a woman in California, her name is Nadine Burke-Harris, and I don't know if you're familiar with her studies. It's called the ACEs studies, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Are you familiar with that?
No, not really.
No. Yeah, so she is, I think she's a physician, a public health physician, and there was a study, I believe it's a longitudinal study that they did tracking a lot of people, so it's a very rigorous study. And from the social aspect, there's an impact of there's 10 questions. Questions might be ranging from, having parents who screamed and yelled, having parents who were incarcerated, witnessing violence secondhand, neglect, certainly, alcoholism, drug addiction, mental illness. If any of your caregivers or members of your immediate family had any of these things, or you experienced any of those things, even if it was secondhand in your childhood, you get a number, and the number ranges from 1 to 10. Any score, typically people have a score everyone probably has a score of 3. Most
what
people
does that
have
mean?
At least. So if you have an ACEs score of 3, that means that you have had, a few adverse childhood experiences that can impact you in your adult life. It can impact your health, your physical health, your mental health. The studies revealed that it impacts your potential for earning. It impacts your potential for obtaining an education, whether you have chronic diseases like diabetes or even psoriasis and heart disease. So, it's coming out now when we see the news and we hear that, neighborhoods of color, communities of color are experiencing higher rates of death from the COVID than their counter, non-communities of color. And these ACEs, I would guess, most likely factor into that. So where does mindfulness come in? Certainly mindfulness is thousands of years old, right? And it's just one of the traditions or teachings of the sacred texts out of India, out of the Buddhist traditions, and there are so many schools of Buddhism, right? But mindfulness is really, I think, and the scholars that I study, it's about the alleviation of suffering. So it's a tool, it's a kind of a solution for the alleviation of suffering. The Buddha's Four Noble Truths, right?
And this is something very profound. You just mentioned that this is alleviation of suffering. It is not going to culminate the suffering.
It is a way to work with what is. That's what I've found it to be. And so now when I, run my online mindfulness meditation offerings, and I'm doing it, 5 times a week now, really that's the main theme that seems to come up each session, how to work with what is. how to be with what is without needing to change it. And, that's been, and I think this continues to be a practice. How do I be with what is?
It is what it is. Then mindfulness, how can we cultivate mindfulness in a situation when we know that we cannot control about that situation and it is what it is, but how can we alleviate any suffering or something which is super hard to digest, to swallow? What can we do in that situation or in any moment? How can we remind ourselves? It's a very broad question, so wherever you want to start.
Yeah, so for folks like me and perhaps you and others who are successful and educated and privileged in many ways.
I'm still learning, by the way.
No, of course we are all learning. I meant privilege, we have jobs, we have family, we have our health, we have shelter, food. There are many people who do not have any of these things. But I think to answer your question, it's both and that's what it really attracts me to these particular teachings, which are Buddhist teachings. However, the practice that I offer, the tools that I offer of mindfulness are completely secular. That doesn't mean that I don't reference, that I don't really draw on, like anyone draws on great literature, great philosophy to inform their values and their purpose and meaning in their lives, right? We draw on these minds and those leaders, more experienced than us, right? So
right.
The texts in themselves, I've studied them a bit. I'm not a scholar at all. I'm just a dilettante. I'm a yoga teacher, so I studied the Yoga Sutras a little bit. Before that, I was much more interested in mythology of many different cultures around the world. And early on, I was drawn to Jung and Joseph Campbell and that approach to really framing experience, understanding experience, living and suffering, right? But I wanted to, I just wanted to say that I really dig it. I really like this perspective of it doesn't have to be either or. I don't have to see black and white. Fear, when I acknowledge my fear, doesn't mean I have to be overrun by my fear. When I am intoxicated by whatever joy or, elation or awe or reverie, it doesn't mean I have to be, annihilated by that either, or swept away, that I'm, just taken over by that.
And when you feel overwhelmed in any situation, if you do, then what mindfulness practice do you do in that situation?
Well, I wanted to touch upon the foundations of mindfulness, right? There's 4 foundations of mindfulness. And the first foundation is the body, mindful of the body, and that includes the breath. The second foundation of mindfulness is the feeling tone. So it really would be translated as likes, dislikes, and neutrality. So mindfulness of feeling tone, likes, dislikes, or neutral. The third foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of thoughts and feelings. And so when we say mindful, again, it's paying attention on purpose in a particular way without judgment, right? And then the fourth foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of phenomenon. Phenomenon being I'm not quite sure, actually. I don't have a lot of experience with exploring that in my practice. It's really, I think, much more of an esoteric thing. If I were to say, name one, thing of the fourth foundation of mindfulness, maybe it would be intuition, perhaps. Mindful of intuition, mindful of sixth sense phenomenon, right? So that said, these are the ways of entering into knowing through the body, through likes and dislikes, strong aversions or strong clinging, right? Through our noticing and awareness of our emotions, of our thoughts, and then lastly of phenomena, bringing our awareness and attention to that. But there are these attitudes, right? Because we started with intention, which also implies attitudes, right? I have a certain intention, but I also have a certain attitude. And so we call these some people list them as 7 attitudinal elements. Other people say there's 9. And these attitudes are how we frame our approach to mindfulness. And they really can help us. One of them certainly is non-judgment, beginner's mind, trusting, generosity, letting go, letting be. I don't have them anymore at my fingertips than the ones I've named.
Yes.
But so I know what you're driving at. You're asking me, give me some hacks. Give me a couple. And certainly this is the age of hacks. We all need whatever we can get. Absolutely.
I would like to ask you that, yes, understanding the framework foundation is very important, and mindfulness is an umbrella. And if our listener want to ask, where can they start from? If they have never practiced mindfulness technique / hack, where can they go? What can they do? What is the first step?
Well, the first step that I usually suggest is to take a posture, to take your seat. And I always like I've been to a couple of groups with Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he references and says, let's take our seat. And when you take your seat in meditation, in mindfulness meditation, you're really taking a stand. You're really taking a stand for what you think is important. So there is this, again, framing with intention, what I value, what my attitude is, my perspective. And that's like a relationship, right? So the first thing I would offer is, let's just have a little bit of a relationship with ourselves that is welcoming, that is kind, that is tolerant, and that is just, like loving. And I think that's actually kind of foreign to a lot of people, strangely enough.
This is amazing. I know a relationship with ourselves, loving relationship, kind relationship, because we human beings tend to beat ourselves, we judge ourselves, and we are not compassionate toward ourselves when we make mistakes.
Yeah, we're not good enough. We don't measure up, all of these things. We compare, etc. So again, getting back to this both and, it's not necessarily either or. Wonderful teacher, Pema Chodron, I'm sure you've heard of her.
Yes.
She talks about this idea of self-improvement, and that if we really pause and think about it, it's a subtle aggression against ourselves. So just for a minute, just take a second. It's really this lens that what I am, who I am, is not okay. It has to be different. So certainly, there's a balance, and that's what the philosophy of Buddhism is talking about when they use the word equanimity. It's not either or, it's both and there is the aim, if there is an aim of the arrow, Zen and the art of archery, is balance. Somewhere in between, somewhere in the mid-range of, I'm not good enough and self-improvement. You know what I mean? So a little bit in the middle there, that's
And
really
we work on the self-improvement, even if we feel there is nothing wrong with us. And if we completely embrace our imperfection and still being able to work on the self-improvement side.
Well, I think you have to, again, there's no, recipe for everything. I mean, if a narcissist were to, accept himself or herself completely as they are and see no need for self-improvement or adjusting or bending or being flexible, I don't know. That's different. That's a different thing. But those of us who perhaps are not suffering from a serious mental illness and, just dealing with perhaps depression or anxiety is really what I find everyone is experiencing, myself included. I am no Buddha. I am no guru.
Every guru faces that.
I have my own anxieties and fears. And so how do I sit with that? So the first thing is the relationship to myself. It's this remembering to remember that right here, right now, so I might suggest a grounding exercise where I call it 3-2-1. And this is a trauma-informed approach.
What is 3-2-1?
3-2-1. So it's for when someone is triggered and maybe they're having a PTSD flashback or a panic attack, but it's good for us in our everyday life when just our general thought patterns seem to be hijacking us, out of the present moment and into future thinking or past ruminating. So you can begin by sitting and feeling your bottom on the chair, the backs of your legs. You can tune into the sensation of your feet, maybe within your shoes, feeling the touch sensations of all the little nerve endings of the skin, even feeling the weight of the feet connected to the floor, the soles of the feet. And you might even tune into the sensation of your hands, feeling the contact either on your thighs or hands being held palm to palm. Another point of contact you might really tune into, not in the visual sense, not in the thinking sense, but in the real, like feeling the body, is the back against the feet, in particular the bottom seated. And I often suggest this idea that we're not floating in space like astronauts. We are held in this gravitational force field. And so just tuning into the physical sensations of connection, points of contact. And then I might move through the senses with you and name the sense of sight. We could begin with the sense of sight. I might ask you to look around your room. You can do it right now, wherever you are. Just scan the room. Really look. And I'm going to just pick an arbitrary thing for you to notice. See if you can find anywhere in the room 3 green things. And if your eye goes to like one object and you're like, oh, there's 3 things there, like just a little bit further, really look. the floor, the ceilings. Maybe if you're near a window, outside the window, your clothing. If you were in a room with others, you would notice them. You would notice their colors. So 3, just anchoring to right here, right now. And then I might suggest the sense of sound, the sense door of sound. And we can do that here right now. Just listening, seeing if we can distinguish 2 sounds in the room that we're in. Maybe we hear them outside our window. Maybe we even hear our own breathing. And then lastly, 1 would be the sense of touch. So without moving your body, just pausing, freezing, like a little bit of a statue, not too stiff, and notice what your hands are touching. Don't move them, and just feel the temperature, the texture, the whatever is there to be felt with the sensation of touch. So that's, you can do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. That's something you can do anytime you feel like heart racing, anxiety, oh my God, I want to set my hair on fire, run down the street. We can just stop, stop, and 3, 2, 1. Visual, sound, touch. If you were doing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you might even explore smells, tastes. But this is good and a kind of down and dirty one. So here we are, we're kind of moving into this interiority of our experience. We're moving into the body, which is the first foundation of mindfulness. We're moving into experiencing what's happening, what we can feel now. And so attention is a funny thing,
It is.
So mindfulness has an element of mind training to it. So we're really training our attention. We're training our mind. That's why, MBSR and many other very evidence-based mindfulness teachings, protocols are being done by the military, by athletes, by high-achieving performers, because there is this element of training the mind. So paying attention on purpose to what we select, we're paying attention to. But the nature of the mind is that it wants to wander. And we don't need to beat ourselves up about that. We don't need to, that's just the way it is. The sky is blue, water is wet, the mind wanders. Oh well. So how do we work with it?
And even in meditation, mind wanders all the time. We can't stop mind to work. If mind stops working, or if mind doesn't wander about thoughts, we are dead.
Well, my experience with thoughts in meditation is that I can observe thoughts, I can notice thoughts, the comings and goings of thoughts, without really getting entangled in them. And like I say, hijacked. The Buddhist metaphor is often monkey mind, right? So jumping, running, clinging, grabbing from here to here. Another metaphor is, another animal metaphor for the mind or the quality of the mind is wild horses.
Wild horses?
Wild horses.
Interesting. So you are mentioning that we can cage that monkey mind?
Not cage, be with it. It's the relationality to it.
Interesting.
It's the relationship to it. I imagine you don't have children, but
No,
those people who are
not right now.
listening who do have children, or maybe you have nieces or nephews, and certainly we all were children at one point in time, there's a kind of an energy that's like here and over there and over this feeling, looking, searching, exploring, and that's just a lot of, energy. And sometimes it's frenetic, and sometimes it's just, fragmented, and sometimes it's joyful and curious and, voracious. So we don't need to dull it or dampen it down. We can just, sometimes you sit down, you take your seat in the morning or the evening, whatever your time of meditation is, and you have the wild horses pulling you this way and that way. But sometimes you sit down and the quality of the mind is spacious. There are larger pauses between thoughts. And this is just the third foundation we're talking about. We didn't even talk about feelings. When strong feelings arise, similarly, we can also ride the waves without being overwhelmed by the tsunami of the emotion or the feeling.
It can be so tough.
What's that?
It is so tough.
It is, but it's also kind of fascinating. And, once you here, there's another one, non-striving. That's another foundational attitude, non-striving. So while we sit down and we're looking for we didn't even talk about the neuroscience. Maybe we should talk about the neuroscience another day, but, that's really what drew me to this particular practice of mindfulness. It was, this is not like this, there's evidence that working with the mind, working with the body, we can change on a cellular level. The body has this neuroplasticity. The brain has neuroplasticity. So by practicing, all right, and I often use this analogy with my students, well, you're going to be using 5-pound weights or 2-pound weights or 10-pound weights, and you're doing your returning, repetition, coming back again to rest in the attention, to, rein in your wild horses and bring them back over and over again, just like you're doing your repetition of your bicep curls. Over time, the muscle becomes developed, right?
Right. It takes time. When we start meditation, it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes years and years.
Yeah. But honestly, there's so much data, especially with this mindfulness-based stress reduction protocol, MBSR protocol, that after study, 40 years worth of scientific studies, that even after an 8-week course practicing, I think, in some studies it's 20 minutes a day, some studies it's 30 or 40 minutes a day for 8 weeks, and we're not even talking every day, 3 times a week. Improvements in blood pressure, improvements in psoriasis. That was one of the first studies that was done at UMass. Improvements in levels of pain, improvements in, so many things. So the neuroscience reveals that working with ourselves in this loving, kind, firm, diligent, systematic way, working with the mind, the body, emotions, thoughts, sensations, relationships, communications, mindful speech, mindful listening, right?
And mindful eating, mindful parenting. I think mindful word is kind of overused at times. I feel that it is used everywhere, and sometimes people may not have the right context.
Yeah, it's become, right, there's a lot of articles you can read now about McMindfulness, the commodification of mindfulness and, mindful this and mindful that, and, put a green background on it and you can sell a lot of it. I don't know. I guess.
Yeah, I think information overwhelm is there. The main thing is to really practice. When we practice, then the rubber meets the ground.
And I would encourage, anyone who's interested in this in beginning, to really have this no expectation. So it's like you do the next thing and you let go of the outcome. You just do it. Like, do we take walks? Certainly now we're taking them because we're stir crazy. And yes, we've gained 5 pounds, but, sometimes taking a walk just for the sake of taking a walk. Same thing with practicing mindfulness, not necessarily to get anything, but just really because it's nourishing and
This
can
is
be
so
rewarding. And
amazing, actually. So it's okay to have intention behind mindfulness, or I should say mindful walk or mindful meditation or any other practice. But and I kind of remember this thing, when somebody wants to be spiritual, then our ego might come in. So that spirituality becomes a spiritual ego. So not doing mindfulness from a place of ego and doing it from a place of love to really calm down, not attached with the outcome. It's going to take time to really reap the benefits of that.
Right. So let's just make an analogy, another one, like it's relational, right? So let's imagine that your practice of mindfulness were a new, girlfriend or boyfriend or lover or potential mate. I mean, you would take your time and it would be the enjoyment of the moments of discovery and curiosity and really, the sense doors, right? And also, the deep listening or the deep sharing. There's something really interesting, something called polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges, scientist whose theory it is. And I've just started practicing this and introducing it to my students as well. In the belly is something called the vagus nerve. And from the belly, often that's one of the practices is a body scan, and so softening the belly is the instruction. Soften the belly, and I'll often refer to the belly as your second brain. Right? We know a lot of science is behind gut health and immunity and our digestive system, which, by the way, is very closely connected to the stress response, right? That's one of the first things that shuts down when we're in a heightened stress response, fight or flight response. But the vagus nerve in the belly it then kind of has these tentacles, these nerves that they reach branch like a tree all the way up the front of the torso, through the neck, into the head, and into the brain. And this vagus nerve in the belly is responsible for calming. It can calm us. And the connection goes all the way to the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for the frontal lobe of the brain for decision-making, discernment, clarity, organization, things that the adolescent brain is not quite developed, right? Their prefrontal cortex is not quite developed yet. So, and when you're in a stress response, that's the first thing to shut down, the prefrontal cortex. And you go back to a more primitive brain function. The amygdala is firing and it's reactive and it's going into survival. And so what Zen and the MBSR school of thought really says is that the modern day word for what the Buddha called suffering and the cessation of suffering is stress. So stress is the same as suffering. And, it has many levels. There's psychological stress, emotional stress, and certainly the physiological responses of stress. So when we know that we're having a stress response, like the animal kingdom, they have a stress response. The gazelle is chased by the lion, stress response, cortisol levels jack up, adrenals kick in, flight, they run. And then as soon as they're safe and the danger has passed, the stress has passed, the system goes back to normal. The nervous system goes back to normal. But in our current society, particularly, and I experienced this firsthand, this is what brought me to mindfulness. It actually brought me to my knees, It just doesn't turn off. It's like a kettle that's constantly on a low flame. It doesn't turn off. And this is where the ill health to the body comes, where the immunity becomes compromised and the body begins to overcompensate in this hyper state of stress, right? So in working with mindfulness, it really is a modern day version of working with our stress and learning to work skillfully with it, recognize when it arises, which requires, some education, some practice, self-awareness, right?
And we can practice breathing in that stress response zone, because when we have stress and instead of reacting, we can take a pause. And when we take a pause, we get into the space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That famous quote, right? Between stimulus and response, there is a space.
And that is the getting in the gap. And there are many.
And therein lies our freedom, the space, right? So, another few hacks. I would direct everybody who's listening and interested in this there's so many resources out there. Certainly, go to my website, mindfulconnect.org. There'll be some resources there, but there's so many resources for us to use, guided meditations to, like I said, training wheels. We're working with the first foundation of mindfulness, which is the body, which is, we wear it like a loose garment, right? Wear your body like a loose garment. And so we work with the body, and part of the body is the breath and breathing. This Dr. James Gordon, I'm very privileged to be taking one of his mind-body groups right now with an excellent teacher out of Arizona, Cynthia. Shout out to you. Thank you, Cynthia. And, part of working with mindfulness and meditation is working with a group of people, is being, the Buddhists say, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, which Sangha means your community, your group. It's not a solitary practice. It is an interpersonal practice in many ways. It's not about you retreating to your cave and sitting on a cushion. It's relational.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, and it requires a lot of consistency. And the main thing is just to get started and be consistent for at least 15 to 20 days. And then it creates that ripple effect. I started meditation for about 3 years ago, and I struggled with that. I didn't know what I was doing. I had a lot of doubts, but I kept going and going, starting from 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Now I can comfortably practice meditation for 20 to 30 minutes. Please.
Yeah. So what made you keep coming back? What was it that brought you back each time and incrementally increasing the time?
Incrementally increasing the time was sort of setting a challenge for myself. And I didn't feel any benefit at that point. Now I feel that there is different level of peace I get and how I cultivate that 20 minutes of peace into many areas of life throughout the day. So coming back to your question, my thing in life is, okay, if I see somebody who is succeeding in their life, they're happy, they're fulfilled, what they are doing in their life. So I would try to mimic that in my authentic way. And there's so many case studies that a lot of successful people, happy, fulfilled people, they have some sort of mindfulness practice in the form of meditation or different practices. And I kept going and going and going. So I didn't stop. And I started following japa meditation. Japa is God chanting, and I learned this. I should say I started doing it from Dr. Wayne Dyer YouTube meditation. So in this japa meditation, we kind of scream some words, and then because we are mindful and we are focusing our attention on that mantra and chanting that mantra in that japa meditation. And then I started practicing transcendental meditation, just repeating this word called release, and then adding some good words such as relax, repeating this mantra over and over and focusing on the breath. And there is another small mantra from Thich Nhat Hanh. You breathe in and you say present moment, and you exhale, you say wonderful experience, present moment, wonderful experience.
Yeah. So in how I would translate that, and I also have experimented with mantra for a time. I practice what they call passage meditation with someone named Eknath Eswaran. He's not alive anymore, but out of California, he introduced me to passage meditation, which is a little bit of a variant on mantra meditation. But the thing I wanted to, hold on, I'm just losing my train here from, excuse me, because I wanted to circle back to what you were saying. I like this idea you're talking about, shouting out or expressing, whatever God, words, or whatever words. Recently, in discovering the work of the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C., Dr. James Gordon, he kind of encapsulated it for me, and I think this is a really good framework. He talks about 3 different groupings of types of meditation. There are the concentrative practices, which could be, just the focusing awareness. There are the mindfulness practice, which again is bringing our full present awareness to the experience. And then there are these expressive practices. And he talks about art, drawing, chanting, dancing, shaking. And he talks about the origins of these expressive meditations as being very ancient from many indigenous cultures. And that just really made sense to me. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but maybe at a later time.
Yeah. So we can have another session on meditation for sure. Yeah. And since we are running out of time. Yeah. Colleen, it's been an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed, and I'm sure our listeners will definitely learn so many new things about mindfulness. It will give them a basic foundation to start from and go to the next level. And thank you so much for your time.
I do appreciate it. Thank you so much for the conversation, Nishant.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode today. I hope you learned from this episode that you can apply in your life. If you did enjoy this, please subscribe to the podcast, The Nishant Garg Show, on Apple Podcast. You can also subscribe to the show through my website, https://nishantgarg.me, NISHANTGARG.me. You can also share this podcast with your family and friends or whoever want to feel fulfilled. And thank you so much again.